a spiritual quality. It's a skill set. Right? So to see the other's world. So power is the capacity to be effective. Internally, your power is defined by your capacity to know your own unique purpose, shape your own destiny in the face of opposition that you find in the world. People who know who they are dangerous to people, power systems that depend on you being ignorant about who you are. So, strength comes from the struggle, strength training, not just necessarily the attainment of the goal. Because they may give you the goal to buy you off without actually changing the power dynamic. And it's the goal that they give you, not the goal that you might want. So a very old strategy is essentially to buy you off with trinkets or the trappings of power. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But all right, so elements that you possess as long as you're alive. Spiritual power, there are a number of names for this. The Yoruba have a word for the essential power of the universe called Ashe. Ashe is defined as the power to make things happen. Objects, persons, animals, trees, whatever can have Ashe. Lightning has Ashe. Power to make things happen. Ashe is positive and negative. It's neutral, essentially. It's life energy. The Chinese, in martial arts systems, acupuncture systems, Qi or Qi. In Islam, we talked about this baraka or blessing. Hawaiians use mana. It's a spiritual energy. Hindu prana, the energy that's in life energy that's in the breath. Use it for yoga. In the Christian tradition, grace. Grace brings revelation, healing, etc. God bestows it on you. Holy Spirit, from the Aramaic, ruach, which means breath. L'chaim in Judaism, to life energy. Power tools, I did go over this a little bit last time. So physical power tools, health, strength, flexibility, resiliency. Mental, intellect, knowledge, insight, common sense, mother wit, constructs and models. So these are ways of looking at the world. Emotional power tools, patience, empathy, compassion, love. Spiritual power tools, wisdom, foresight, intuition, vision, faith, unconditional love. So empowerment is as natural as breathing. So to be powerful in a power vacuum is to know which elements are absent and what is present that can make you powerful. So to exist in a hostile environment is to rely on your inner truth. Now the reason I started out talking about Pandora is just to give you an idea. It has an atmosphere. It has certain conditions that you may or may not be able to see, like the magnetism, like the electricity that's in the air, things that are corrosive. So you got to know what those things are. Because if you walk into a power vacuum, well, what's missing? So I kept it simple down to 7 elements. But that was only to be able to teach the idea. So there may be others. But I'm breaking it down into elements that are commonly constructed in power environments. So gold, oxygen, energy, resources that nourish, information, and spirituality, or spiritual resources. So each element in an atmosphere of power has its own rules to either be intuited. So intuition means to be taught by an inner teacher, or discovered on your own, developing from the basic construct. So in getting people to look at this, Pandora, as compared to Earth, Earth used to be like Pandora. Lots of volcanoes, very high hydrogen sulfide content, CO2. In fact, oxygen was rare. In fact, the life forms that existed back then, oxygen was poisonous to them. So you may not know this, or you may not have thought about this, but oxygen is extremely corrosive. It's like acid. It breaks things down. That's why they use oxygen in bleach. That's why oxygen rusts iron. Oxygen supports fire. Oxygen is toxic to those life forms like botulism, gangrene, things that are anaerobes, anaerobic bacteria, they exist without oxygen. Those were the dominant life forms on the planet when the planet didn't have free oxygen and had lots of CO2. Thermophiles, those are basically bacteria that can live in hot springs. In these vents, in the ocean floor, where the volcanic water, seawater comes up at, temperatures that if it was on the surface, it'd be steam, but because it's underwater, it's just hot water under pressure, and these bacteria live in there. And then there's life forms that live next to them that can fix oxygen from the air, from the water, by use of these bacteria that live without oxygen in symbiosis. Reason I'm bringing that up is what happened is bacteria evolved that were able to spread oxygen and kill all the life forms that existed where oxygen was poisonous to them. And that revolution basically led to us. And the only life forms that are left from that ancient time are things like gangrene and botulism. But Earth used to be like Pandora. And then more oxygen came up, CO2 went down. Now we are naturally raising the CO2 levels up. Again, through human activity, we'll see what happens. But the idea is that there's elements that exist that we evolved to live in a certain combination. We require around 20% oxygen, or whatever it's 21% oxygen. All right, so let's look at gold as an element in an atmosphere of power, because that's the one that people usually go to. So gold, like literally that, like money. So there are rules for that particular element. So there's rules of money, finance, and the golden rule, that is them that got the gold, makes the rules. So what are the rules of money? Not simply more is better, but what do the rich and wealthy know that you don't? That gives them power. And what are those things that they know that you can know that can help you be powerful in that environment, whether or not you have money? Is a question. So what's the difference between rich and wealthy?
They have access to resources. They have way more access to resources that sustain life.
Who?
Oh, the rich. Rich people have more access to resources.
Than the wealthy?
No, than the poor.
Okay, than the poor. But good point, yes.
Oh, really?
So what's the difference between rich and wealthy?
Gotcha. Rich can have a lot of money, but they might not necessarily be. I guess it depends on your definition of wealth. Wealth can be spiritual.
Well, we can use, yeah, wealth can be spiritual, yes. But if we talk about, and it can be defined culturally differently, right? But if you use a straight, like American Heritage or Webster's or whatever, definition of wealth, yeah, you can have a lot of money. That makes you rich. Okay? But go ahead, Tim.
Wealth is established as a continuum, whereas rich money.
Yeah. But you add wealth. Yeah, so wealth could be a continuum. But wealth adds power and influence that money can't necessarily buy. All right, so for example, what are some of the symbols of wealth and power that rappers often get if you believe the reality portrayed in rap videos? What do they almost always have?
Cars, money, women.
Cars,
alcohol,
money, women, what else?
expensive.
Bling,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so as an example, let's say you have, let's see, how much is that?
1 million.
$1 million? Add some more O's. Billion? Okay. So let's say you have $1 billion in the bank. And it collects interest. How much interest does $1 billion, at what interest rate? It depends, right? Let's say you have $1 billion in the bank, and it generates easily, so, $1 billion is 1,000 million. Right? Straight math, right? So, suppose just keeping your $1 billion in a bank, it generates $10 million in interest. Just sitting there. Now, what can you do with $10 million? Well, quite a lot, right? So, one of the things that the wealthy know that the poor don't know is that if you wanted to buy a Rolls Royce, okay, and a Rolls Royce is anywhere between 100,000, and you wanted to just buy it from the interest that you have in $1 billion, then you could buy a bunch of Rolls Royces. But you only need one per house. Like during the presidential campaign, Romney has 13 houses and, Cadillacs, whatever, right? And he only has a personal fortune of $200 million. Only $200 million. Not even a billionaire. But can own a bunch of houses which, basically increase in value.
You know about that house he has in Laguna Beach where he has the underground garage that has the elevators that brings up his SUVs.
like a conveyor belt.
Right. Yeah. So one of the basic points I used to make about the difference between being rich and wealthy. Yes, Jay-Z's wealth is rich. Yeah, you can, be a vice president of Anheuser-Busch. Yeah, you can own part of the Brooklyn Nets, but you couldn't have access to President Bush. Bill Gates has access to President Bush because he owns the company that writes the software for 95% of the computers on the planet. That's power. You just own stuff. The wealthy control stuff. Okay? That's the difference between wealth and being rich. Power to control stuff. Rich means you can just buy stuff. Now, Jay-Z may be moving up in influence because you have a black president, but only marginally so. So that's that's one of the hidden rules of gold as power. Yeah, the rich make the rules, right? But what are the rules of how money works? So the rich are buying bling with their play money, that is the interest, not the principal. So knowing the difference between, the principal and the interest you're drawing on the principal. Same thing for loans. Pay down the principal, not just the interest. Or do both, right? There's hidden rules around money. So that element has hidden rules of that. Oxygen. So you can think of oxygen as literally the element that allows you to breathe. Or you can think about, you walk into a room, does it smell fresh? Lots of air in it, or is it stale? You can talk about a power environment. Is it powerful because there's fresh ideas circulating? Or has it been the same for years and years? When they talk about old money. Well, we're used to, having the money within our family and keeping it within the family and staying within our power base, right? So oxygen, fresh air, vitality, energy, ideas. Oxygen supports life and combustion, but it's corrosive in high amounts. Not enough means the room's stale. It has to be circulated to be effective. You can suffocate if there's not enough. So I'm not just speaking literally about the element. I'm also talking about a metaphor where there's power like oxygen that's different than the power of gold. And we're talking about human environments that are constructed socially. Energy. So there's different kinds of energy. Energy defined broadly as the capacity to do work. Different types of energy have different rules, like electricity, magnetism, vitality, enthusiasm, emotion. Just like I said the other day in terms of electricity, where you don't basically shower with your ghetto blaster or your cell phone, because it can get shorted out. But you can use water to generate electricity, and you can use electricity to heat up water, but there has to be a structure to run those two forms of power together. Okay, so again, what are the rules, conditions, capabilities, limitations of different types of energy? So I threw in a Fanon quote because a lot of times when people get angry, like anger can fuel energy, right, as an emotion. But fervor is the weapon of choice of the impotent. That is, you're excited, you're angry, makes you do an action, but the action isn't well thought out. So yeah, rage can work, but in the short term, but over the long term, it stops working because there's going to be a time when you're too tired, or you're not angry anymore, or you got bought off, so you're not angry anymore, and they maintain the power on you. So Fanon suggests, psychiatrist that he is, revolutionary black psychiatry that he is, that you plan your shit out to sustain beyond the anger. Anger is good enough to get it moving, but it won't keep it moving.
At the same time, contentment can be the anesthesia of the masses.
Indeed. Truth. Power elements. Resources that nourish. Could be food, water, the cleanliness of the environment, love, compassion, empathy. So I was thinking of, for example, in a community coalition organized against particular things. My grandfather's church. Oops, back. Wait a minute, how'd that happen? Machines. My grandfather's church. So if you understand how power dynamic, he's the preacher, he's speaking from the pulpit, But the real power behind the church is my grandma. Right? Who can convene the church ladies? And what do the church ladies do? They're the ones that get the food together for funerals and weddings and all that kind of stuff. And every church had a kitchen. And yeah, who coordinates that? The things that nourish. Because remember, I was creating this construct in the context of looking at how communities of color, particularly black communities, organize themselves. And cooking. Cooking combines the powers of the resources that nourish. Right? So I could call up Grandma and say, Grandma, I'm on a 3-week fast for my health, for spiritual reasons. Love to see you. Don't cook me any food, because I'm not eating. And of course I show up, and there's fried chicken. There's gumbo. There's, greens and okra and cornbread. And wait, I said never mind. Sit down. So I once had to break a 3-week fast on Grandma's fried chicken.
That's not good.
Oh, my stomach protested. I said, shut up. You were raised on this. Deal with it, right? Once had to break a fast with, some Christians in Glacier Park, and, I accepted their hospitality, and they handed me a hot dog. Another week-long fast. Okay, what do you do when Jesus, offers you a hot dog? What do? Pass the mustard. All right? Because it's cooked with love. Yeah, limited love, but all right. It's offered to you in a certain spirit. I'm not going to diss you by not doing that. I'm going to overcome that and just say, I'll reach out to you. That's the enlightened thing to do. Just like, that's why I led with Grandma's fried chicken on the 3-week fast. I was raised on this. I told her not to, but of course, she's a grandma, so the way she shows love is by those resources that nourish. So cooking is a way that combines those particular power elements literally by providing nourishment. And there isn't just food, physical nourishment, there's also food for thought. All right? So that's an element in power. Where you can be in an environment where the power vacuum it's not nourishing. It's toxic. They're constantly attacking you and putting you down. They're not feeding your soul. They're not feeding your spirit. Yeah, you're wild. You've got, the ability to, keep a house and, pay the rent and put food on the table, but it's not feeding you. So resources that nourish are an element. Information is a form of power. Okay, so there's information that's timeless, that doesn't change, that doesn't grow stale, it's always fresh because it's always true. There's information that is time specific, that could be true at one time and not true at another, or it could be true in the future but not true now. Or it could be past dated. Could be dated information. So information that gives power. So knowledge is power, but what kind of knowledge gives you what kind of power? And is that power applicable? Or applicable, if you want to pronounce it that way. So knowledge and information has a shelf life. How current is the knowledge? And then what kind of information keeps people in power, and what kind of information do people in power have that people who are powerless don't have? So that's why I tied that into the whole money thing, because they're often interrelated. That's an element, okay? Is there a model for understanding what's happening that no one is talking about? That's another form of power. So the constructs I gave you for understanding intersectionality, crash. Okay, that came out of the experience, the poetic experience, and the creative intellectual experience of black feminist lesbians in the 70s. They're saying, okay, we're subject to racism. Because we're women, we're subject to sexism. Because we're poor, we're subject to classism and capitalism. Some of us may be disabled. Some of us, we fear getting gray hair. Maybe we don't have a fig. Well, that's sexism. And then we're lesbians, so heterosexism, and we're affected by all of them. And those are invisible systems. What if you don't talk about them? How do you handle them? How do you handle a privilege system? What's the difference between a glass ceiling and a sticky floor? Which side are you on? No, you have to understand all of them. Those are invisible. So what if we couldn't talk about intersectionality or different isms? What if we couldn't talk about glass ceilings? How would you know what was happening to you if nobody's talking about it? Because in certain power environments, they don't talk about the things that make you unequal. And that's how they maintain their power. So it could be dangerous to talk about them. Like a moquita. I don't know if I put it on this slide. Moquita. So moquita is a thing everybody knows, but nobody talks about it.
That's what it means?
Yeah. It's from the same culture that gave us taboo. A moquita is a form of taboo. Taboo means sacred, but it also means something you don't talk about. It's a forbidden subject. So moquita may be a taboo, but a moquita is a thing that everybody knows but nobody talks about. So what happens if you walk into a situation where you're the only one that don't know, and everybody else does know? You're in a power vacuum for that particular thing. Whatever that is. Yeah.
Like the monument, the big, I forgot the name of them, obelisk in Washington, D.C., when in front of every temple in Egypt there were numerous.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Obelisks symbolize particular things.
Washington Monument.
Washington Monument is an obelisk. A lot of obelisks were stolen from Egypt and placed in Europe and in the United States.
That's where Martin gave his speech, right?
Yeah. The reflecting pool of the Washington Monument, the other end of that, yeah. So is there a model for understanding what's happening that nobody is talking about? So I gave you the word moquita, taboo, but the concept is not just in English, right? All right, so 7 elements of power. Power environments are constructed to give power to some and not to others by combining or excluding different elements to create power vacuums for that particular element. This is some dangerous shit. I hope you realize that. Because I'm making visible what wasn't. By giving construct that says, okay, if you're going into this meeting and they know something that you don't, how are you going to get that? This is not a theory. This came out of the work that I developed around looking at the whole issue around the LA Rebellion and the responses to the LA Rebellion. The local coalition, one of the 7 community partnerships that was funded to look at that issue, was a block away from Ground Zero. And they had gone into the community and asked the community what were your concerns, and the community said there are too many damn liquor stores. So the coalition went down and found out the alcohol outlet density was 3 times the legal limit, and that the city had been breaking its own law to put in more liquor stores because they were getting money from it. And the only time that they had the meeting, because the meetings weren't publicized, was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Which, if you got a job and is not advertised, even though it's a public meeting, a public hearing, you wasn't there to stop the liquor store. Notice how that works now? You walk into the city meeting that you're not supposed to be at. How do you hear about it? Well, you're a liquor store owner and they tell you, well, wait, how can I get on that list? Oh, you just ask. Well, if they don't advertise it, how do you know to ask? Who can? So here you have, so Karen Bass, I'm throwing it out, shout out Sister Karen Bass, who started out as the coalition executive director and is now a California Assemblywoman, their legislature. She was head of the one coalition, South Central at the time of the rebellion.
Who's the congressman from California that used to be in the Black Panthers?
Yeah, there are a few of them, but yeah.
Congressperson.
Yeah. Male or female?
Female.
Elaine? Maybe Elaine.
I don't know who it is,
Yeah.
but that person has a lot of power.
Yeah.
Rebellion.
The rebellion is referred to by the mainstream media as the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles, but it wasn't really about Rodney King. But in LA, we refer to it as the rebellion because rebellions are planned, riots are spontaneous. This was a planned action. So part of that, for example, then going to those meetings where they're going to put in, where they made the decisions to put in more liquor stores than was legally allowable. So what happens after that action destroyed, the rebellion destroyed half the liquor stores? So Karen and her group are basically now put in place, because they know about the meetings, to send retirees to those meetings, armed with the information to decide which liquor stores are going to be put back in place or not.
What do you know about the Top 40 Commission?
I assume you're not talking about the Billboard Top 40.
No, I'm talking
I've heard about it. Go ahead, break it down.
Well, it's a group of the richest people in the U.S. that get together and decide who gets money and who doesn't.
Ah. I'd heard about that, but
Is that real?
could be.
That's real.
It's possible. They would vote their interest, sure.
Then it's a school.
And it's only 40?
Well, there's more, but they
Yeah.
call it that. And then there's the Skull and Crossbones.
Yeah,
I mean, these are secret societies.
yeah, secret society.
That hold on to power at the expense of the disenfranchised.
Yeah. Go to slide, please. All right, so power environments are constructed to give power to some, not to others, by combining or excluding different elements to create power vacuums. The poverty is constructed by limiting gold, money, or access to gold as an element, or access to money, and that is also the knowledge of how to deal with money, as well as the information access to replicate the things that gold does. Because money doesn't buy everything. But the things that money can do can be supplemented by other elements, and that's kind of the idea about learning about these different elements. What can you do if you ain't got money that can do the things that money can do in terms of the power to make things happen? Right? Eliminate information. So the top 40. Well, sure. Is it only 40? Is it, the Fortune 500? Is it, So there are some things that money can do and some things that money is incapable of doing. All right? So seven elements in an atmosphere of power. Constructs power environments. All right? So leadership focuses power. Different types of leaders exist in different types of power structures. Sometimes this, because we often talked about from the 60s and 70s, Racist power structure. Well, what does that mean exactly? How do you break that down? What does that look like? And is it just race? No, it's not just race. By studying, for example, the elements of crash, you can say, okay, there's lots of different ways you can discriminate and create environments that favor some folks over others. Sometimes the structure itself gives you power by position, particularly at you're the top. So for example, corporate or anything built along corporate or governmental lines that has a single head or CEO. The structure itself gives that person power. Theoretically, that person has access, unlimited access to all information that flows from within that organization. But a lot of times, the most powerful person in an organization is not the CEO, but the CEO's secretary or administrative assistant, because they control the information flow. Who gets it, who doesn't? I mean, I'm just giving you a tip, because, you know, a lot of time I make friends with the admins. Because the admins don't just type papers and answer phones and do memos. They control information flow. They control access to people in power. Okay? When you approach a person in power, it is best not to ask questions that you don't know the answer to already. It is best to develop a policy suggestion of how to do something before you bring it to them, and couch it in such a way so that it looks like it's their idea so they can take credit for it. Women do this all the time with men. Make him think it's their idea. That's not manipulation. That's an understanding of the structures that give men power and women not. How do you have power? You know, how did grandma control what the sermon was going to be? A suggestion over dinner to grandpa. Oh, wow. Why don't I use that scripture?
That's the secret to success with women, is make them think it was their idea all along.
Well, right. And, you know, that works either way with either gender.
Yeah, either back and forth.
So, sometimes the structure itself gives you power by a position. So it's good to analyze who has what kind of power. So admins have access to the power of information, even though they're lower in the hierarchy than the CEO. Sometimes in another organization, like in a personality cult, a person's personal charisma gives them power. So in a top-down hierarchical organization, power is focused upwards towards the top from the bottom. All those different elements. Information, attention, influence, decision-making. So for example, when I say hierarchy, we usually talk about it in terms of a pyramid. And who is ever at the top is the most powerful, and then people below them. Who's next powerful, and et cetera, president, vice president, hierarchical organizations. So who has power, relatively speaking? So top down, hierarchical organization, power is focused upwards from the top to the bottom.
That's not trickle-down economics then.
It's not, well, trickle down.
That would be trickle
Even
up.
down, even with trickle down economics, you're focusing the power of gold at the top, and basically the excess trickles down, and that, you know, that the whole rising tide raises all boats thing. Right. Does that happen?
No.
In a trickle? No. Why don't you just basically say, look, after your first billion, look, I don't need $1 billion. You know, I know what my debt to asset ratio is. I don't need $1 billion. But, you know, I'd rather just do this and just be sustained without taxes. But let's not even get into that. Understand how it works.
Well, capitalism is trickle down. Socialism is from the bottom up.
Yes, in theory.
Yeah.
So, leadership focuses power. Some leaders lead through domination, that is, the threat of violence through fear. And respect is given out of fear. So you'll see this both in corporate situations, you'll see this in street gangs. In fact, you'll see that whole concept of respect. You disrespected me. Like, I'm supposed to respect you. Why? Who are you? I'm Bumpy. Well, who are you, really? I'm supposed to respect you because, you know, this is like in Danny Glover in Grand Canyon. Right? So Kevin Kline is lost in Inglewood in the hood after a Lakers game. His car breaks down. He calls AAA. His BMW is like stranded, and these brothers come up, and they're like, I suppose, gang members or something like that. So they're about to jack him, and then Danny Glover pulls up, and then, you know, begins hooking up. Like, who am I? Yeah, he begins hooking up the car that's broken down to his truck, right? And so, you know, one of the gang members asks him, what are you doing? I'm a tow truck driver. I'm hooking up, I'm doing my job. I'm just a working man. You disrespecting me? Who am I talking to? Am I talking to the leader? No, we all the leaders. Oh, so I am talking to you. You the leader. What do I have to do my job? Well, he's disrespect. Look, what do I have to do to get my job? The way this is supposed to happen, he breaks down, I come pick him up. You ain't even supposed to be in the equation. That's the way it's supposed to be. Well, I don't need your permission to do my job. That's the way it's supposed to be. Are you disrespecting me? No, I'm not disrespecting you. I'm just telling you the way it's supposed to be. So the kid says, you know, if I didn't have this gun, would you respect me? The way it's supposed to be is I'm supposed to be able to do my job. You're not even in the equation. So the only reason, I'm talking to you is because you got a gun and you interrupting it. So you thinking the gun gives you respect? The ability to kill somebody gives you respect? So respect is the power to kill somebody? Fear? Is that how Martin Luther King worked? Is that how Malcolm worked? Is that how Mandela worked? Rosa Parks? They have guns? So what kind of respect is power? The fear of domination. Some people think respect is that, instead of who you are. Right? So, respect is given out of fear in certain organizations. Leaders operating from that model tend to limit the means to become powerful. They don't want any competition for power. So they control people out of fear and domination. So respect, therefore power, can be given out of love as well. And self-knowledge, i.e., do you respect yourself? Do you love yourself to not hang around people that do stupid shit? A foolish associate is more dangerous than a determined enemy. Do you, I think I was telling you about the brother that basically did a prison stretch because he was with a woman who he knew had stolen a credit card, but he wasn't trying to get any of the money, but she used a stolen credit card, so he was named as an accessory just for being there, even though he didn't get any of the money. So he did 5 years in prison behind that. Go, yeah. Is that foolish? You know, and he said, I remember what you said. A foolish associate is more dangerous than a determined enemy. There it is, right? Because I illustrated with, you know, kidnapping Armin, right? So, same idea. Know your environment. Respect yourself enough to not be around people who can mess you up. So, some leaders lead through empowering others and fostering and sharing the means to become powerful. because they understand the way power works is there are some forms of power that the more you give them, the more you have. And the more you allow other people to become powerful, it doesn't threaten you, it makes the organization more powerful in your organization. Especially if you construct that power structure to do that. And I'll show you how this is done. So, in bottom-up organizations, like a community partnership, theoretically, nonprofits or community partnerships, the community values drive the organization, which is supposed to be responsive. But since this is often delivered through a corporate-style nonprofit organization, so nonprofit corporation is still a corporation, it just means that its primary goal is not profit, but service or education. But somebody still has to turn the lights on, pay the bills, pay for paper clips. So they have to basically take in more money than they pay out. Right? So, but the profit doesn't go, it isn't profit so much as going back into the organization and sustaining the organization. So what usually happens is the few at the top run it to benefit themselves while keeping information and resources for themselves. Theoretically, in a non-profit, they're supposed to have open books. They don't often. Sometimes they do, but so often winds up running like a top-down corporation. So, as a result of our experience with, that is, the coalition trainers, and I and another guy sent to basically study the South Central community partnership in terms of the after-action report, after funding. Feds wanted to do follow-up. How do these partnerships work? So one of the things that we observed with the South Central partnership done by Karen Bass is what I'm going to show you. I called it the South Central model. The feds may or may not have published this, but I'm publishing it because here it is, right? Spheres of influence. Also known in military circles as revolutionary cells. Similar model. So organizations are a form of technology. All technology reflects the values of the culture that created. Corporations have the right of human beings without any of the morals that human beings have. The commitment is to profit, not necessarily truth or morality, right? You can't charge a corporation with murder. And even if you did, who do you indict? How do you kill a corporation that kills human beings? Anyway, information in a corporate structure is shared only to maintain existing power relationships. That's why the graphic of the Twin Towers, which is the World Trade Center, is basically just, one of the ultimate symbols of corporate power. That's why it was a target by Al-Qaeda. As a symbolic act. So, a natural leader's influence radiates out like the sun or a warm fire, attracting those who seek light and or cold. Charisma within a leader calls to the charisma within everyone. It's how leaders empower people. Empowerment comes from within. And the only way somebody can empower others is by calling, invoking, and awakening the power that's inherent in them, and by affirming it. This is the process that Audre Lorde was talking about within poetry. It's a spiritual power. This is the way that we observed Karen Bass empowering people within the coalition. So the coalition was able to recruit volunteers who became leaders, and recruited volunteers who became leaders, and so on. So that you had welfare moms running the budget because they could plan ahead with scarce resources. You had retired grandmas basically replicating the knowledge of Karen Bass and going down to the meetings where the permits for the new liquor stores were being held and jamming them up. And saying, let's not just do a liquor store, let's do a grocery store. Because we ain't got no grocery stores. That's what we need. All right, so this awakes power that is present, that does not in any way detract from anyone else's power. Natural leader spheres of influence can overlap and can move. A leader who's an influential volunteer trainer might not be interested in smoke-filled back rooms, wheeling and dealing. Former gang member might be a good organizer, welfare mother, good fundraiser. And this is actually what we saw within that particular coalition after the rebellion happened, because the rebellion was a disaster. And so FEMA comes in, and FEMA wants to distribute food baskets and diapers and all this other kind of stuff, but they don't know the community. The coalition knew the community and said, okay, this grandma don't have grandchildren, so she doesn't need diapers that you were going to send to her. This person does need them, etc. FEMA had no idea. So they created this whole infrastructure before the rebellion happened that was in place once the rebellion happened and was able to assist government in a way that didn't deal with it. Then they said, okay, look, let's not pit the black community against the Korean community, against the Latino community, against Vietnamese, against, all right, let's work together. Let's have a community cultural celebration in which we can understand about each other. The feds definitely wouldn't have done that. For cross-racial understanding? No way. We want them fighting against each other. That maintains our power. So, charisma within a leader. Calls the charisma within everyone. So that's spheres of influence. The ultimate goal is that each person could carry the basic plan of the organization by themselves. Each person becomes the seed of the next organization. So the idea about revolutionary cells within military or within, say, terrorist organization is taking out any one or two or three leaders does not destroy the organization like it would in a hierarchical organization, because each person is able to replicate the entire organization by themselves if they needed to. But this also works for prevention, and also within a corporate structure, for example, like Mondragon, which is a series of interlocking cooperatives that are worker-owner run. All right, so in case the organization is destroyed by internal politics or external assault, it can be recreated. Now, these community coalitions, as far as I know, got defunded. They may still exist, it's possible. I know Karen moved on to the assembly, so I don't know if the organization exists, but to talk about it, to be able to focus on particular problems and solve them internally, this is a basic model for being able to do that without funding, but being able to attract funding if you need to. Thank you. Okay, or you can begin to create an organization based simply on the story or the legend of it. So this is originally called the South Central model because this is how I observe power being distributed within this particular organization. That basically arose in the late 80s, early 90s in response to particular needs, but there was essentially the information to recreate it elsewhere. That's why I'm disseminating it this particular way.
The organization that organized the rebellion?
We don't know the organization that organized the rebellion. I just know that this particular substance abuse prevention partnership, which was one of 7, had a particular response where they didn't have the same money in the community. Like, for example, to send people out in the community, do the community survey, they needed t-shirts, but they didn't have t-shirts. Where do you get t-shirts to identify people? Well, the coalition that met by Newport Beach, one of the members was the owner of Esprit, the clothing company. He donated t-shirts that were specially printed at his own expense. And their coalition met in a yacht club. Like, there ain't no yacht clubs in South Central, but they were able to network and partner to create the t-shirts to do the community survey because they couldn't pay a university to do it, right? So it's about, okay, information. Networking is a form of power.
Grassroots movement.
Grassroots movement, right.
Kind of logistics.
Yeah, like holistic. All right, so this will be up. We should stop here because I'm sure my 2 minutes are up. They're about to roll credits. I have to fix a computer glitch in Moodle because I can't enter your grades for some reason, so I'm going to explore why that is.